Boys and girls, let me tell you a story today about an incredible man called George. Now, George lived a long time ago. In fact, he lived a very long time ago. He lived nearly 200 years ago. Now, that's a long time, isn't it? But George lived in the south of England in a city called Bristol. Now, at the time that George was alive, there was a big problem in his city. You see, in his city there was lots of boys and girls who were orphans. Do you know what an orphan is? An orphan is somebody who has no parents to look after them. And the problem was, when George was alive, that there was nowhere for them to go. And there was nobody to look after these orphans. Well, George, he loved God. And George thought, I need to do something to help these orphans. What can I do? But the thing is this, boys and girls, George, he wasn't a very rich or wealthy. In fact, just like me, he only had in his pocket a few coins. That's all he had in his pocket. And he thought, I can't really do much to help these orphans with these few coins in my pocket. So he prayed, and he asked God to help him help the orphans. And guess what, boys and girls? As he started to pray, more and more people started to come to George and say, George, here, God's put it on my heart to give you this gift of money. And after some time and had gone by and these people had given him money, George built a house. And in this first house that he built, he was able to look after 30 of the orphans who had no homes and no parents but lived on the streets of Bristol. What an incredible difference he made in their lives. But guess what, boys and girls? He didn't leave it there. He said there's 30 being helped, but there's still hundreds who need help. So he started to pray again and say, God, I want to be able to do even more for these orphans. And before long, he was able to build really big houses called orphanages. Now that's a fancy name, but basically an orphanage was a house for children to be looked after and to live in that didn't have a house or parents of their own. And over the years that followed, hundreds, in fact thousands of orphans of local children were helped out by George. And he gave them a place to live, he gave them some education, he gave them food to eat, and he took care of them and helped them to grow up. But I want to tell you about one particular story about George. Once he'd built these big orphanages, there was one morning that he woke up and he went to the cupboards to try and make breakfast for all these hundreds of kids that he was looking after, and there was no food left. And he had no money now in his pockets, not a few coins, no money at all. But he knew that God was going to look after them, and he prayed a simple prayer. He prayed, God, will you give us breakfast? And just after he prayed that prayer, knock, 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 there was a knock at his door. So George opened his front door, and there on the front door at the step was the local baker. And the baker had brought with him loads and loads of loaves of bread. And this is what the baker said to George. The baker said to George, he said, I couldn't sleep all night. I knew God spoke to me last night, and I knew you didn't have any food left. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, I got up and I started to bake, and I've been baking ever since. And here it is. It's for your breakfast. George took the bread and he ran through to the dining room. He got all the kids gathered around and he said, guess what? We've not just got bread for breakfast, we have got fresh bread. Just after that, there was another knock at the door. So George went and he opened the door. This time, it wasn't the baker at the door anymore. This time, it was the milkman. And the milkman said, listen, I'm really sorry to bother you, but my milk cart has just broken down in front of your house. And I've got all this milk on the milk cart, and I need to get rid of the milk off the milk cart so that I can take the milk cart away and get it fixed. Can you please take the milk for me? So George took the milk, ran through to all the kids and said, guess what? We've now got fresh milk for breakfast as well. And that, boys and girls, is a true story. That actually happened. And it reminds me of our fruit today. Our summer fruit today is faithfulness. You know, God is so faithful to us. When George prayed, God was faithful. And he answered, and he looked after all these young children who had no one else to look after them. So God was faithful. And secondly, George was faithful. He saw all these children in his community who had such a big need. And he said, I love God and I want to do something about it. And over the next 60 years, not just a few years, but 60 years, George dedicated his life to look after these orphans who had no one else. Now that is faithfulness. And I think we can all learn from that story and all become a little bit more faithful. With God's help, we can do it.